excited to have Anna McGovern on the podcast today. So, welcome, Anna.
Hey, Courtney, thank you so much. Katie, thank you. It's great to be
So
with
good to
you guys.
see you. Yeah.
Great to see you.
So, we were just talking prior to the recording about dogs, and I was talking about Issa being our mascot, and Anna's dog has it's a he
It's a he.
his own Instagram account. So I was like, I need to get Issa. I need to up my game.
Oh, that's so funny.
So, Anna, we're so happy to have you.
Same here.
We'd love you just to start off by telling us, the listeners, a little bit about yourself personally and professionally.
Oh, sure. Oh, Anna McGovern. I am married, 25 years of marriage this year, and we're going to be going on a European cruise in the
Oh,
fall.
nice. Oh,
That's
So
exciting.
congratulations.
Nice.
milestone. We are officially empty nesters. Two boys, 22 and 23 years old, and they're both officially launched and out of the house.
All right.
Yay.
Well done.
Thank you. So other than Sesame, we have nothing but boring lives now. But a supply chain geek for most of my life. I fell into it by accident. Don't we all just kind of fall into it? I've been a supply chain practitioner, my goodness, for like 35 years, but I'm only 29. So, but I've been in all the lanes of the supply chain highway. I've done plan, source, make, and deliver. I started out in manufacturing for the first 8 years, worked for an industrial plastics manufacturer, and then I spent 23 years working for Unilever and consumer packaged goods. And basically would have like a new job every 2, 3 years working in different business units. So it never felt like I was in one place for 23 years.
Yeah.
And then after that, I went into private equity, much smaller by design because I wanted to see how the real world lives, rather than like a big, consumer products company that's very global and very large. So I spent a couple of years working for a company called Arcade Beauty, where I was leading supply chain and procurement. And then I went into nonprofit for a little while in the middle of COVID,
My
working
goodness.
for one of the largest food banks in the country. And I've been in my own business full time almost 4 years now. So and I would say my sweet spot is on the planning, the end to end planning side, and then procurement. And people tell me you got a niche. I have niched. My value proposition, my unique proposition is that I am meeting people at that intersection of end to end and the supplier ecosystem, which, really delivers value. My last three professional roles were created because of that background. So
That's so cool.
I know. And, being a dog mom is wonderful now. The puppy stage.
Okay, so Anna, you said that you kind of fell into supply chain by accident. So one, I want to hear that story. How did that happen? And then two, even after that, like what did you have like an aha moment where you knew though, like this is for me and I want to stay?
Yeah, growing up, first of all, I was the first kid in my family to go to college, right? So my parents are immigrants. They both have like a sixth grade education, but they're the smartest people I ever knew.
Mhm.
They're both gone now. Um, so I wanted to be a psychologist. Like I went to school, I majored in psychology, and then like I didn't have any guidance or role models. So when I started to research, I was like, "Oh, I have to go to school forever. I don't have that kind of money." So I took a job as a customer service coordinator for the manufacturing company that made, plexiglass type. Okay, that was the competition, but thermoformed plastics and that sort of thing. So I went into customer service and then I applied and got an operations role that was doing material planning in the factory. So doing materials for the factory. And then I became a purchasing manager. And and that was a lot of fun. I love the hands-on aspect of it. And when I got recruited into Unilever, I was commuting and working, in Manhattan on Park Avenue. And I would go home every night thinking, I'm going to throw up. Um, They basically hired me, and they're gonna discover that I'm an imposter. I mean, I was suffering major imposter syndrome, and I was
Mm,
like, "There's no way I belong here." But then I realized, that I actually knew what I was doing once I got rid of that lizard
yeah.
brain. But the aha moment was solving problems, just being in a position to solve problems on a day-to-day basis, and just hear a lot of positive feedback like, "Oh, that's a great idea." I just loved it. Like, I grew into it. I grew passionate about supply chain, and I never really looked back. And then I went and got an MBA in finance. That was like a miserable 3 years. No, I mean, the reason I say that is because, I went to a regional university here for business school. I did it part-time while going to work, and I just kind of made the decision that unless you went to Wharton or Harvard, getting an MBA in marketing, which was my passion. I loved my marketing classes, but I was like, unless you're doing that, it's not really worth it unless you're going to Wharton or Harvard or something. So I decided, let me go and get an MBA and concentrate in finance. So that's what was miserable. But honestly, it was probably one of the smartest decisions I ever made.
All right.
Right.
Because I realized the value of having that financial background,
Mhm.
later on in my career.
And it's so funny you say that almost everybody we interview, I say 50%, they go into finance, they say it was miserable, and then and then, everyone always says they love supply chain for problem solving. So you have been consistent in those 2 things. Like, Katie and I did not do the finance. We did not dabble in that, I don't think, but everybody says they tried that and decided to stick with supply chain.
Yeah,
And so, Anna, as we love this is if you're walking on the street, you're at a dinner party, how do you describe in layman's terms, what do you do?
my goodness. Um, so it's funny because nowadays, supply chain is so mainstream. Everybody knows what it is. Since COVID, you don't really have to
Yeah.
explain supply chain anymore because a 10-year-old understands it now. But when people, I mean, I used to get phone calls from my friends like, my refrigerator is not going to deliver for 8 months. Can you tell
Can
me
you do something
why?
about that?
Yes, exactly. And I was like, I don't work in refrigerators. I'm not in appliances, but that's the funny thing is people think supply chain, and you know it's like they just think, oh, supply chain, and they don't know how many facets of supply chain there really are. But if I were to explain it, what I say is, I help business leaders find the money.
Mm,
I mean, that's how
yeah,
I describe it today. Is, my value proposition in terms of what I do is I help business leaders, find and deliver growth and value through their supply chain and procurement organizations. And most people pretty much get that, even if
mhm.
they're not in the trade. They usually can understand what that means.
I like that, find the money.
Find the
That's a good
money.
one.
Okay, so switching over a little bit to finding the money, I'm wondering too, with your psychology background, did it make you like a really good negotiator in procurement?
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that. When I first went into procurement, it was in early 2000s, right? It was in fact 2001. Unilever is when I went into procurement, and they were actually looking to change the purchasing function and mindset, like, going from transactional to more strategic. And they wanted people with a planning background and a finance background. So I got into
You're like,
procurement.
hey, that's
Yeah,
me.
exactly. And honestly, I was put in charge of a portfolio buying packaging for personal care and home care, and rigid components, and I didn't know the difference between a bottle or a cap. And I didn't know how to negotiate. I didn't play golf. I didn't smoke cigars. I certainly didn't play poker. So I didn't know how to negotiate deals based on, those attributes. And back in those days, that's what it took. Suppliers were inviting the buyers to those activities, and that just wasn't me. So I started to talk to suppliers, and I started to visit suppliers so that I can understand the value chain and I can understand the cost drivers. Ada was my friend because I didn't know how to negotiate based on, the poker face. I decided I'm going to learn everything I can about the cost drivers. And so I would model costs. And so data became my best friend. I leveraged data because that's the only thing I knew how to do. And so I started to negotiate based on facts, right? I started to negotiate based on facts. In fact, I was visiting a key supplier in York, Pennsylvania once, and it was just me representing my company. I was on their, home turf, sitting in one of their conference rooms with about 10 people. And the president of the division, when I was trying to tell him his prices were too high and here's why, and try to get to the bottom of the deal, he called me a liar publicly. I will never forget it.
Oh my gosh.
Gosh.
He did. So I actually had to prove by putting the cost model up, and I redacted, any competitive information, but I showed him how I came up with where I thought he should be. And honestly, he later publicly apologized.
Oh, I wasn't
Good. All
expecting
right.
that.
Yeah,
Good.
but
Okay.
here's one more. He actually became he became my boss because after I left Unilever and joined Arcade Beauty, the private equity backed company, he was
Yeah.
the CEO and he
Did we
created,
remember you?
of course, oh my God, we had a long-standing relationship. We had a long-standing relationship. And then he was one of my first clients when I started my business. He was one of my first clients. So this is one of
He
my
just wanted you
best.
on the team. He didn't want to be across the table from you. He wanted you
Yeah,
on the team.
yeah. So it was really a wonderful opportunity of just being able to negotiate based on facts, based on data and cost drivers, and helping people understand that. So that was probably one of the early aha moments for me in terms of, don't, let's let the power that you have speak. I certainly didn't know from negotiating. And in fact, when I interviewed for the role, it was like, okay, what's the last, purchase you made? Major purchase. I was like, I bought a car. Okay, tell me how you went about doing it. So think about the preparation that goes
Hmm.
into planning a deal. Um, and it's really about preparation. Negotiations and any kind of negotiation, whether it's internal or external, is about being 99% preparation and 1% discussion or 10% discussion. So um, you really have to understand what the other guy wants and what's in it and how do we come to consensus. Um, because honestly, I do much more negotiating internally. Over the course of my
Mm,
career, the hardest
Yeah.
negotiations were internal and not with suppliers.
Yeah.
so true, Anna. So true.
Well, and again, what I appreciate about that through that whole story was you saw a model that was happening on the golf course or the cigars or whatever else, and you're like, this is not for me. But you love data, you knew data, and it felt like a way to approach like whoever it is that you're negotiating with, also in a way that's authentic to you. And it's kind of interesting now because everybody talks about should cost modeling, and you were doing it, way before you invented it. Maybe I don't know.
Honestly, I didn't invent it, but I leveraged it, right?
Yep.
I leveraged
Yep.
it. And I often say, I mean, I'm very fortunate to have been trained at Unilever because, I feel like I've earned a PhD over the years, just being trained,
Mm,
in state of the art processes and modeling. And believe me, it's not perfect by any means. There's no such thing as perfect in the world of supply chain, but it's how do you respond is the key skill set, right? How do you respond to changes? Because there's always going to be disruption.
So, Anna, you talked about this really key area of your expertise. So, in an era where many relationships are pieces of advice for fostering truly collaborative and valuable supplier partnerships, like how would you think about it today?
Yeah. So, Courtney, I mean, if you're reacting, it's already too late. So what
Mm.
I've advocated and what I've done throughout my career, and it's been nearly 25 years since I started in procurement. And whether I was in planning or procurement, I can pinpoint every career highlight. I can trace it back to a supplier partner relationship,
Mm,
right? So, you've got to put a proper governance in place because it's not about transactions and issuing POs, and it's what do you do to focus on those strategic parts of the business and those strategic suppliers that drive your business, right? It's always the Pareto rule, 80% of your revenue or 80% of your spend is going to be governed by about 20% of your suppliers. So you're not going to do this with staples, for office paper and paper clips. You're not that's not what you do. We're talking about strategic suppliers that either have a big spend or they impact your ability to innovate. Because what you want to do is create enough trust and long-term governance, that's, centered around we're going to be partners for an extended period of time.
Hmm.
And you put guardrails around it. So it really is like
okay.
putting a ring on it, but you've got to put the ring, you've got to put the guardrails and the prenup, into a contract. Right, but it's like we're looking at long-term partnerships that extend up to 3 years or more.
Mm.
3 to 5 years of, "You're gonna get my business, you're gonna get this part of my business, and the volume is gonna be roundabout here in a range." You never commit to an actual volume, but you're getting 100% of this portfolio, or you're getting 80% of this portfolio over this length of time. And during that time, we're going to put some governance around it and we're going to put some key KPIs in place. We're going to talk about, how many new innovations can you give us because you've got R&D and you're going to help our R&D come up with new projects, right? So, um, I always like to use two examples, classic examples. Keurig K-Cups, from Green Mountain Coffee, was a supplier innovation. And
Hmm.
that innovation, changed the entire way we consume coffee, right? Swiffer, for Procter and Gamble, was a supplier innovation that changed the way we sweep our floors. So that's the power of solid relationships where they bring you, if you're a customer of choice, they bring you their innovation ideas. Or,
Yeah.
like when I was managing global personal care, 8 billion euro spend, it was 22 billion euro in revenue. And it's like, okay, we want to enter new Asian markets. Okay, Mr. Label Supplier, we're going to be producing in Vietnam. We don't have a label supplier in Vietnam. And now, as one of our strategic partners, would you like to invest and grow with us? We're going to go and invest in
Yeah.
Vietnam together. Would you be willing to do that? Okay. Or the bottle supplier. You don't want to be shipping, water balloons,
Right.
across oceans. So you need to be near the producing location. And so you give them the opportunities, you give them a reason to believe. And the reason to believe is joint growth, joint invention,
Mm.
joint creation. And then they do that with you. And you have the proper governance, you're checking your KPIs every year.
Yeah.
Eventually you have to separate. If the relationship no longer serves, you can, amicably separate and move on to something else. So it's not like it's forever, but generally if it's a good productive relationship, it'll go on for years and years. as long as we're delivering on the value, which is either bottom line cost savings or top line revenue growth.
So, Anna, I had a question. Not that this happens, but just want to throw out, say you got the prenup, you got the ring, and the supplier, the strategic supplier, I can never say strategic. Me and Katie go back in this. I'm like strategic. The strategic supplier is not living up to the marriage agreement.
Yeah.
And you're so deep in, it's hard to do the amicable breakup. So can you give an example, or just how have you seen big companies really navigate that? Because I think it sounds sometimes easier to break up than than it is, especially when they might have a large part of your portfolio.
It's breaking up is very hard to do. Like
Like the song.
it really is, and that's no joke. This is why you don't do this with the entire portfolio of your suppliers. You do this these kinds of relationships with very few suppliers, the ones that are really driving the business. But yeah, it's been I've had to endure that. The first thing you need to do is you need to protect your business. Okay.
Mm.
And this is why you don't put all your eggs in one basket. And there's openness and transparency about that. So, but you can give as much as 80%, right? But especially in CPG, we've got you guys are in CPG. You have flexibility to be able to change out portfolios or new volumes like new innovation or new programs or new SKUs that are going to be launching. Instead of giving it to the incumbent, you give it to a new supplier, right? And so you start to develop and grow alternate suppliers, and the strategic one that's giving you pain starts to not see the growth, right? They're just maintaining. And what you have to do is you create resiliency and optionality by making sure that if you need to make the switch, you've got options to switch to. And then it takes some very tough conversations. This is why it's extremely important that the KPIs are established ahead of time in the governance model.
Mm.
Here are the KPIs that we're going to measure, right? There's always the basic ones around, service quality and price. Those are just those are just table stakes at this point.
Yeah.
But then how many, supplier induced innovations have we created? How many um, you know, uh, 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 new parts of the business have we expanded into? Like what geographies have we expanded into? Have they, enabled growth in that way? But it takes, holding them accountable. We agree on the parameters, you have to hold them accountable. And usually the governance is, in monthly conversations, there's the weekly, local to local relationships. There's monthly work team conversations that are happening around the MRP and so on. And then there's like steercom conversations that are happening at the quarterly level. And then there's top to top meetings where we're sharing strategic plans on an annual basis, and it's at every level that you're having the hard conversation, and we discuss if it's working or not and what do we need to do to correct course, because you always want to try and correct course, because switching costs can be extraordinarily
Mm.
high, especially if there's investment involved.
Um, one of the things that you said that it's even got me kind of reflecting on is a lot of times I think about strategic suppliers, and we always think about like to get low cost, low cost, low cost, and maybe some resiliency in our supply chain. But really thinking about them as a partner for growth, that's exciting. Like that's such a different way to think about it. So I think those are some good additions to the, service, cost, and quality, but some bigger ones.
Yeah.
And I did not know about K-Cup and Swiffer. I wrote that down. I had no
That
idea.
that is like to me, like I love Swiffer, and I was like in a supplier, and you always hear about how P&G, and they do invent a lot of cool things, but to know that that was actually a collaboration with a supplier,
Mhm.
like that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean there's tons of examples,
Yeah,
that I can give you from the,
that's a huge one.
but those are, ones that people can really truly relate to.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, for sure. Okay, so I'm gonna switch over a little bit to your Pondview Consulting, but I think there's some overlap here a little bit too with your book, which we're gonna talk about as well. Um, You have advised and helped so many different companies doing everything from improving OTIF, reducing working capital, like some really big dollars and big changes. And one of the things that you talk about is having real world supply chain wins, but also helping a company transform like chaos into a competitive advantage. So rather than you talk a little like your book going from resiliency to anti fragile isn't just about bouncing back, but almost like thriving in it. And how do you turn it into an advantage? And I was just wondering, like, could you give us an example or two of where you've helped do that or see that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking a long time about the 3 Rs, right? And the 3 Rs are respond, respond, recover, and renew, right? So respond and recover are resilience. Okay, so COVID hits, war breaks out in Ukraine. Hurricane hits, the East Coast, and ports are shut down. So whatever it is, it's how quickly can I respond to the problem? Or, I had a client where literally last year, right after Thanksgiving, they hit a cyber attack, and they were literally down for about a month. I mean, it was just incredible.
I
But
might know who that is, but think I
I
heard about
sure
that one.
hope
Go
not.
ahead, I'm sorry.
I sure
Okay,
hope
maybe
not.
not. Maybe it was another one around that time too.
Oh my God. Yeah, it does. It does happen all the time. So the ability to respond, how quickly can you respond? And what do we need to know? So you have to establish the baseline of what do we know? What do we have? What's the schedule? What are the orders? How can we move on? What contingencies do we have in place? Because response, you're not always going to solve the issue. So sometimes it's about containment. So, I mean, last year I had a client where, we were buying PET bottles, and PET is blown out of a little, call it a test tube. Like, it's like you heat this PET tube, and then you blow it into the bottle that you want to use. Like, think of a Coke bottle or a water bottle.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, so it starts as a test tube. It gets heated, blown into the shape and size that you want. So that tube is made, that's an extruded part. Okay, it's extruded. Um, the screw on the injection machine is something that rarely ever breaks. Okay, so what happened? The screw broke. Okay, the screw broke, and it happened to be the only machine that was making that particular part. There was no resiliency in the supply chain whatsoever. So the first thing we had to do is respond. Like, how much inventory do we have? What are the orders? What's going to be impacted? And oh my God, we don't have enough inventory to cover. All right. And the recovery plan is going to take 3 months. Okay. Because you have to manufacture a new part,
Yeah.
and it takes what it takes. So now you move into recovery, which means containment. To a large
Mhm.
degree, it's about containment, containing the losses. What else can we do? So what else can we do was, can we get customers to take other SKUs, right? So
Hmm.
we've shifted to, let's shift to this, like, HDPE bottle, so like an opaque bottle, for a period of time, and let's see which customers will use it. But this is where that collaboration internally, I mean, it was like hand in glove, daily conversations with sales, daily conversations with R&D, with engineering, with the suppliers, right? And I was kind of like that gatekeeper of all the information. So that's recovery. How long is it gonna be before we recover? So now it's like, what options do we have? What other suppliers? How quickly can we approve an alternate material or an alternate supply? So you've got to look at all the nodes about, if I'm out of production for 3 months, we're talking millions and millions of dollars,
Yeah.
okay, and lost sales opportunity because, in everyday consumer products, if I don't have my brand on the shelf, they're going to go to the next brand,
Yep.
right? So that's just the matter of fact, that everyday consumer products, consumers have a choice and they will switch to your competitor. So resilience is about how quickly we can recover. But anti-fragility is the screw breaks again. It's going to be a 3-month lead time to fix it. But now I've created optionality and choice in the supply chain that thriving means when disruption hits, I've done enough risk mitigation. I've given myself enough options. It's no longer about low cost. That's what COVID taught us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So COVID says, because, prior to COVID, the last 30 years was about offshoring, going to China, going to India, low cost, low cost, low cost, right? Suddenly everything hits and it's about how do we reshore? How do we create additional redundant capacity
Mhm.
so that when SHIT hits the FAN, we're in a place to be able to recover very quickly. So when I have those options and I'm proactively looking at my portfolio, I map it, okay? I map it throughout the supply chain to find those golden nodes, meaning those points of failure. So if I'm mapping the end-to-end supply chain and I identify the points of failure, that's where I create the redundancy or the optionality so that when a disruption hits, I'm anti-fragile. I'm not going to break because fragile supply chains break.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
anti-fragile ones bend a lot. They stretch a lot, but they don't actually break.
So we're gonna switch gears a little bit, Anna, to talking about your source to shelf happy hour, which Katie and I
Yeah.
know the happy hour, and how did you get this started? And talk a little bit about what are some of the key trends or insights that have emerged from the discussions with the
Yeah.
supply chain professionals. So love to hear about this.
So so source to shelf started as quarantine hair don't care. So it started back in COVID when all of us were shut down and none of us can travel. So we were meeting weekly, just as like, venting just to have some, collaboration and to meet people. So we were creating these Zoom happy hours every week where bring whatever you want to drink and we would give a personal update, a professional update, and just, kind of shoot the breeze for about an hour. And we've continued to meet, okay, but that's morphed and then we rebranded it this year um into from source to shelf, right? Because we're inviting all supply chain practitioners, from source to deliver essentially.
All
um
right.
and so if you're in the supply chain in any lane of the supply chain, you're invited. And we meet on the fourth Wednesday of every month. So we're not meeting every week anymore. We meet once a month. And now we have themes. And this year we've actually started meeting in person. So we've got a WhatsApp group that has about 70 people that's very active and we're all over the world and people share information and personal wins and professional wins. So the supply chain WhatsApp group, in between meetings is very active. We've got a LinkedIn private group that we've set up, um, and we now come up with themes based on problem solving. So most of these people have either they work in smaller companies or they work in mid-sized companies, and it's best practice sharing. It's really a format and a forum to help each other. So, we always ask for help. People connect with each other. They connect offline to expand their network, and it's like, what help do you need today? Right? There's unfortunately in the last few months, we've had a lot of people that are in transition. And
Mm.
I think that's a sign of the times, like, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
so people are all in with, what can I do? Who do I introduce you to? What kind of help do you need? It's like, well, who do you know? Who can you introduce me to? So it's really a networking of, really well-intentioned people. And then we'll do themes. Like last month, um, we did a whole thing on how to leverage LinkedIn and what's going on with the LinkedIn algorithm, and how do you get traction on LinkedIn. And we're having part two, the 26th, I think, is the next meeting, um, of August, right? So it'll be a part two because it was such a popular topic that we're going to go to the next step of how to create meaningful content. And that was one of the,
That's so cool. Yeah.
I love this.
yeah,
That's a great
happy to
idea.
invite you guys.
I
Please.
know. I'm like, I want to get on this WhatsApp group.
I was like,
I'll send you a link to like, maybe hopefully you'll have time because we meet 5 p.m. Eastern. It's a good time. We even get, like, I mean, there's this one guy who lives in Dubai and literally dials in at like 1 to 2 in the morning.
Oh my gosh.
wow.
And he's done it a couple of times depending on the topic, because we always talk about here's what the topic is going to be today. We've got probably, we get anywhere up to like 25 people per session. Um, you know, at the 5 o'clock, Zoom call, but the group is actually much, much larger than that in terms of like the in between collaboration that's going on WhatsApp and that sort of thing. And we had 40 people show up at our New York happy hour. It was in person.
That's cool.
Yeah. So, and now we're trying to spring up in like, Chicago and Atlanta and like maybe, somewhere in Texas. And we want to do somewhere on the West Coast. Like, just have some like, meetings where we can meet up, and see what happens. But
I
anyways,
love that. That's
right?
I do
amazing.
too. Yeah.
I did write down quarantine hair, don't care.
Yeah, that was what it was originally called. It was great. Was there something else? Like, what are the trends and the
You
themes?
you already talked about it a little
Okay.
bit. Like, are there any other, and you kinda talked about that already. So,
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
that is amazing.
Yeah.
It is amazing. Okay, so I want to ask, I did download it off of Kindle, about your book that you wrote. I want to kind of know, okay, I do want to know, please share about the book, but also kind of like what inspired you to write it? How was that process and journey? And then obviously, if you could share with our listeners, what might they get out of reading this book? Some
Yeah.
of it you've given away with the 3 R's earlier, but
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. So honestly, it's like my body of work. And it's all my files, it's all my tools, it's my papers, it was my body of work, and I've always dreamed about having a book. And I was like, how do you even start? And then I was like thinking, oh, somebody introduced me to somebody who's in marketing, but they're also a ghostwriter.
oh,
Oh,
Piece of cake. Piece of cake. I'll just get a ghostwriter. Yeah, it'll be a piece of cake. And well, I just had never anticipated how much work it was going to be. Um, because what a ghostwriter can do for you is they can take your massive files and they can make sense out of them and they can give you a baseline, right? And so I got this vanilla baseline where, like, in the first 10 minutes I started to snooze. I was like, am I really this boring? But like but the idea is they just took all of my papers. Like, I've been blogging regularly since I started my business. So I had an extensive blog. So I talk about a lot of stuff that could be the basis of a book, right? So, write routinely, I write white papers. Um, I've written, training workshops and modules, to give my clients training. So I had a lot of stuff and they put it together for me. So, she put it together for me. She's like, this is where the work now begins. Because now I had to give my voice. I had to
mm,
give my experience. I had to give the live examples. So they would give me a section. So it's like, all right, this is the baseline, but now we're going to feed it to you in sections. and you're gonna basically add the flavor and the color. And, and then I would send it to them. There was an editor, so it was a husband and wife team. She wrote and he edited. And I would write, and it's like, this is full of jargon. This is, your audience is not going to understand what you mean by that, 3-letter acronym, or, it's like I had to make, like, they were just so detailed about, you need to expand. All right. And I tend to speak a lot in baseball analogies. It's like, this is great. Okay. Or, we visited my son 2 years ago. He lives in Orlando. We visited for a long weekend and we spent the day at Hollywood Studios, with the Star Wars. I'm just like so completely gaga over the way they run their supply chain, Disney. So I started to, like, talk. I wrote a blog about the Disney supply chain.
It's
Ooh,
impressive. I
Yeah,
tell you
yeah.
what, if Disney ran the world,
Oh,
everything would be on
I did
time.
listen,
exactly.
I did a Disneyland adventure, Disney adventure. I told Katie, the most organized, orchestrated.
Uh,
It's worth every dollar.
I know, but I
It
said
really is.
something about I got an inside look. Like, I used that phrase in my editing, right? Like, I got an inside look into their supply chain. He's like, "Did they take you into the tunnels? How did you get an inside look?" Like, he made me change that phraseology. So this was the journey that I went on, and this went on for months. This went on for months, but in the end, I felt great, okay? Because, there's no shame in getting help, but it's truly my book. It's truly my book, and I had the accountability partners to say, "This is not gonna work, you need to do this." And then, they did the formatting and the editing, and they walked. I've never published a book. I had no idea what's involved. How do you go through the Amazon cave and do all that? But it's beautiful. It's something I'm really proud of. It is the body of my work, and what makes me really proud is the number of people that have come back to me that have said, "You've taken something so awful and complex and you've distilled it into real, cogent ideas that we can actually apply." So I start off like, part one is defining the supply chain and how we got here. The second part is getting into the nitty gritty of, here's how you calculate MAPE, and so it goes into a little bit. And then the last part is really about how you put it all together and all of the case studies. It's filled with case studies, real world case studies that I've done myself or I've researched myself about here's how you apply it. So it's really a practical guide for, all these years of training, and here's how you put it in. And this is why you need really good strategy, and you can't, like, supply chain is really simple if you distill it down to its definition, which is it's about collaborative partnerships. It's an
Yeah.
ecosystem.
Yep.
Now, it's simple to define, extraordinarily difficult to actually execute. And
Yeah.
but, I give you strategies for how to do that. And it takes a long time. It takes a really long
Mhm.
time to gain trust, to gain credibility, to have these partnerships that are going to allow you to grow. Right. But, like, if I can give you one example, I shared the bottles, the PET bottles and the screw. That was all about collaboration. But I mean, I remember a defining moment, like a defining moment in my career where I was on vacation and Hurricane Katrina hit. And I was more on a staycation. We were basically entertaining my in-laws. And as soon as the hurricane hit and I saw where it was hitting, I knew it because I was buying rigid packaging, right? Plastic
Mm,
packaging. So it hit the refineries,
yeah.
right? Refineries make resin. Resin makes plastic bottles and components. So we had to get in and go to our suppliers and say, "We want to make sure that we don't ever run out of bottles. What do we need to do?" And we were actually fronting loans to suppliers. we
Wow.
were we were paying COD, cash on delivery, so that they had cash to be able to
Yeah.
pay their suppliers. But
Yeah.
you can't do that unless you have real tight
Yeah.
strategic
Mhm.
partnerships. So,
And it comes back to trust, just like you said. Yeah.
and that was one of the first, like, eye-opening moments in my career where it's like, "Oh my goodness, I get it." I get it. You have to help them to help you,
Yeah.
right? And then we became the customer of choice, right? So what do you
Mhm.
need to do to become
Yeah.
a customer of choice?
Yep.
Okay.
So many
And
good lessons there.
I know, last question of the day, and this is our kind of fun ethos advice question. So thinking about a moment when you stumbled or made a significant mistake as a leader that in hindsight turned out to be your greatest teacher. So, and then bonus points if you have any funny anecdotes, which I'm sure you do because you made me laugh.
You know what? There's nothing more in terms of teachable moments than eating humble pie,
Mm,
right?
Mm.
So it was very early in my career. And it was still early in my Unilever journey. Um, I was put in charge of so basically we were integrating supply chain. So Unilever had three separate divisions at the time. We're talking a long time ago. I was like 29, 30 years old. And I was working in Manhattan, and we were going to integrate the supply chain planning systems for the three divisions, right? And we were going to implement a new, so what is now Blue Yonder, it was called Manugistics at the time.
okay.
We were going to be anchoring on Manugistics for the three divisions, and the project was going to be based in Clinton, Connecticut, in the middle of nowhere, like on the shoreline, completely different culture. And I went in with, I'm the smartest person in the room. I'm coming from New York, right? And
Manhattan at that.
yeah, I know a lot because I work in New York. And by the way, it was my division that got chosen as the go forward strategy. And I went into basically a logistics center with a lot of proud people who were not from New York. These are people that were in the company for decades. And New York was a completely different culture, much
Yeah.
younger, much more aggressive. And these were people who had been in the same roles for 15 years. They've been in the company for 30 years. And I was in with this guy. I'll never forget it. And I'm like, I come in with this high and mighty attitude about we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And he's just looking back and just sitting there listening to me chirp. And finally he just said, "Honey, been working at this longer than you've been alive. You're not telling me what to do." Okay. And it was just that shock of, I know it all and you're going to do things my way. So I learned that you can't slam something down someone's throat. You need to
Mm,
listen, right? You need to listen. And I remember I got a talking to. It really was so terrible at the time because, I was given a talking to, like, nobody likes you. You're coming in
mm,
here and they think you're really arrogant and you're not listening to their point of view and you think their processes and their experience is immaterial. And if you want to succeed, you have to sit back and you have to listen and listen to their pain points and make sure that their processes, their products, are accounted for in the new process. So it's got to be a team effort and you've got to build consensus. So that was probably a big time defining moment. And
yeah.
from there, I learned that to be an effective leader, you needed to be a servant leader. And you
Yeah.
needed to listen, listen, listen before you even opened your mouth. And I made lots of mistakes along the way. Um, Not as big as that one, not as
Yeah.
big as that one. That was like a real humbling experience. And it worked out. I was, and I am grateful to that leader that I was reporting to who believed enough in my potential to not let this blip, like, ruin my career.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for that, I'm eternally grateful.
I think we've all had that moment before.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anna. This has been amazing. Send out the link for your book. Like I said, Katie and I both downloaded it, and I love hearing the story of process of getting through the book. So that's just
I love all your
amazing.
stories. So
I
good.
know. I
Thank
know.
you.
I'm like, these are great quotes, and we would love to be a part of your super secret LinkedIn
We
or
would be on the
whatever.
WhatsApp
I
list.
know. I'm like,
Well, I'll get you guys added.
Katie and I both like we both. She was in India and I was in Europe, so we still use WhatsApp
We
regularly.
still use WhatsApp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have
people
to. You have
people are like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I love WhatsApp." So,
I love WhatsApp.
if you would love to invite us, we will definitely be a part of that. And thank you so much. It's been such a great last hour with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ladies. I can't wait to, follow you guys on YouTube. I already follow you on Instagram.